Picture this, a February night in 1942. Los Angeles is asleep. Suddenly, at 2:25 a.m., air raid sirens scream across the city. From Santa Monica to Long Beach, every light goes dark. Massive searchlights snap on, probing the sky like giant fingers hunting for something in the blackness. Then it starts. Boom, boom, boom. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. 1,400 shells blast into the night sky over Los Angeles. Shell fragments rain down on rooftops, punch through car hoods, shatter windows. People pour into the streets in their pajamas, some diving for shelters, others just standing there, staring up, trying to see the enemy. What was it? Japanese bombers? A weather balloon? Mass hysteria? To this day, there's no definitive answer, but one thing is certain. This was the Battle of Los Angeles, and it wasn't on a movie screen. It was real, less than 3 months after Pearl Harbor. Welcome to wartime Los Angeles, a city where Hollywood danced with soldiers, where factories ran around the clock disguised as suburbs, where victory gardens sprouted on every block, and where ordinary people transformed their lives overnight to support the war effort. This is the story of a city on the edge of the Pacific, closest to the enemy, farthest from the front lines, and changed forever. The war came to Los Angeles differently than it did to the rest of America. For New York or Chicago, the war was distant, abstract, newspaper headlines, sugar rationing, sons shipping out overseas. For Los Angeles, the war felt immediate. The California coast stretched along the Pacific. No natural barriers between the city and the enemy across the ocean. Just water and fear. On December the 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Angelenos realized they could be next. That fear became real on February 23rd, 1942, when a Japanese submarine shelled oil facilities at Elwood, north of Santa Barbara. The damage was minimal, but the psychological impact was massive. The enemy was off the coast. The next night came the so-called Battle of Los Angeles. Panic, anti-aircraft fire, chaos. Later it turned out there were no enemy planes, maybe a weather balloon, maybe nerves, but the city was already living under siege. And that state of mind defined everything that followed. Los Angeles wasn't just a big city during the war, it was a war hub. By 1943, more federal war dollars poured in here than anywhere except Washington. D.C., 1/10 of all U.S. military contracts went to California, and half of those went to Los Angeles. Why? Aviation, Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica and Long Beach, Lockheed in Burbank, North American Aviation, Vultee, Northrop. These plants churned out bombers, fighters, transports, thousands of planes a month. By 1943, Douglas was rolling out one C-47 transport plane every 45 minutes. 40,000 workers labored at the Long Beach plant alone. Shifts ran around the clock, 7 days a week. The city hummed like a hive. You could hear the riveting guns from miles away. The smell of hot metal and aviation fuel filled the air. But these factories were vulnerable, huge hangars visible from the air for miles. So what did they do? They camouflaged them, literally. Over the Lockheed plant in Burbank, they stretched a giant net of wire and fabric, painted it to look like a suburb, complete with fake houses, trees, cars, even phony sidewalks and fire hydrants. From the air, the factory looked like an ordinary neighborhood. Workers walked under a canvas sky, building fighters in a fake town. It was wartime, surrealism, California style. After that chaotic night in February 1942, when anti-aircraft guns fired over 1,000 rounds into an empty sky, Los Angeles lived in a constant state of alert. Blackouts became routine. Every evening, families covered every window with heavy curtains. Not a single ray of light could escape outside. Street lamps stayed off. Car headlights were taped over, leaving only a narrow slit of light. The city plunged into darkness each night. Special air raid wardens patrolled the neighborhoods, making sure no one violated the blackout rules. If a window showed light, they'd knock on the door. Turn off that light or you'll be fined. It wasn't a suggestion, it was the law. Children grew up not knowing what an evening walk under streetlights looked like. Families ate dinner behind drawn curtains, as if hiding from something invisible overhead. Psychologically, it was exhausting. You never saw the enemy, but you lived as if they were always watching, always ready to strike. Air raid drills were regular events. When the siren wailed, everyone rushed to shelters. In schools, kids were taught to hide under desks, cover their heads with their hands, stay quiet. Teachers drilled them over and over. When you hear the siren, you drop, you cover, you stay silent. Sound familiar? The routine was preparation for enemy bombers that thankfully never came. Despite the fear and restrictions, life in Los Angeles transformed in remarkable ways. The aircraft factories didn't just change the economy, they changed society itself. Before the war, Douglas Aircraft and Lockheed hired mostly men. By 1943, nearly half the workers on assembly lines were women. Rosie the riveter wasn't just a poster on the wall, she was real. She was your neighbor, your sister, your mother. Women riveted bomber fuselages, welded fighter wings, assembled engines, inspected quality control. They wore coveralls, carried lunch pails, and clocked in for 8-hour shifts, sometimes longer. One thing many people don't realize: these women didn't just work at the factory. They went home to cook dinner, help kids with homework, clean the house, do laundry, shop with ration stamps. The double shift wasn't invented in the 21st century. In 1943, many mothers literally worked 14 hours a day. People just didn't talk about it that way. Factories recognized the problem and tried to help. Douglas Aircraft opened a daycare center right on the plant grounds, so mothers could drop off their children and head straight to the assembly line. Lockheed built satellite facilities in smaller towns like Santa Barbara, Bakersfield, and Fresno, specifically to attract workers from suburban areas who couldn't commute long distances every day. The pay was good, better than most women had ever earned. A riveter could make $1 an hour or more, which was real money in 1943. For many, it was the first time they'd ever had financial independence. They opened their own bank accounts, they bought war bonds, they saved money, and they felt a sense of purpose. They were building the planes that would win the war. But it wasn't all patriotic posters and uplifting songs. The work was hard, dangerous, and exhausting. Accidents happened. Women lost fingers in stamping machines. Welding sparks caused burns. The noise was deafening. You had to shout to be heard over the riveting guns and metal presses. The factories were hot in summer, freezing in winter. Shifts lasted 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Your hands cramped, your back ached. You went home smelling like machine oil and metal dust. And yet, most of them showed up every single day. If Los Angeles was a city of factories and fear, it also had one feature no other city could match: Hollywood. And Hollywood went to war in its own unique way. In October 1942, actresses Bette Davis and John Garfield opened the Hollywood Canteen, a free club for servicemen. The idea was simple. Soldiers and sailors passing through Los Angeles could stop in, eat a hot meal, dance with a pretty girl, watch a live show, and relax for a few hours. All completely free. No charge, no rank requirements. Private or officer, it didn't matter. Everyone was welcome. But here's what made it special. The people serving them were movie stars. Betty Grable, the most popular pin-up girl in America, danced with nervous privates who could barely believe they were holding her hand. Shirley Temple, still a teenager, served sandwiches and poured coffee. Bob Hope cracked jokes on stage. Bing Crosby sang. Marlene Dietrich bussed tables. Hedy Lamarr served drinks. These were the biggest names in Hollywood, people who commanded thousands of dollars per film, and they were volunteering their time to serve donuts and wash dishes. The servicemen lined up around the block, not just for the food, though the food was good. They came for the chance to feel normal again, to feel human, to feel like something other than a serial number heading overseas. One veteran later recalled, "I danced with a girl I'd seen on the silver screen just a month before. She smiled at me like I was somebody special. For one night, in that moment, I was." Over 3 years, the Hollywood Canteen served nearly 4 million servicemen. They handed out 3 million packs of cigarettes, 6 million pieces of cake, 125,000 gallons of milk, and 9 million cups of coffee. 3,000 volunteers worked shifts. Actors, musicians, studio workers, regular citizens who wanted to help. When the canteen finally closed on Thanksgiving Day, 1945, after the war ended, there was $500,000 left in the fund. They donated every penny to veterans relief programs. This was Los Angeles at its best. Glamorous, generous, and deeply connected to the boys heading off to war. But while Hollywood fed the troops, the rest of the city tightened its belt. Like everywhere in America, Los Angeles lived by ration stamps. Gasoline, meat, sugar, butter, coffee, shoes, tires, everything was rationed. Each family received a ration book with colored stamps. You couldn't just buy what you wanted. You had to have the right stamp for the right week. Gasoline rationing hit Los Angeles especially hard. The city was built around the automobile. There was no subway. Streetcar lines were limited. People drove everywhere. Now, each family got just 3 gallons of gas per week, about 11 liters. That was barely enough for essential trips. Pleasure drives? Forget it. People carpooled to work. Neighbors shared rides to the grocery store. Walking and bicycling made a comeback. Meat became a luxury. Housewives learned to cook with what they could get. Lots of vegetables, beans, occasional fish, very little beef or pork. Butter was rare. Sugar even rarer. Baking a birthday cake became a major production. You had to save up sugar rations for weeks. Coffee was scarce too, and when you could get it, it was often mixed with chicory to stretch it further. Shopping was an ordeal. You'd hear a rumor that a store had butter, and a line would form around the block within minutes. Women swapped tips. The market on Vine Street got a shipment of bacon this morning. The bakery on Sunset has flour, but you need to get there before noon. And yet, people adapted. They complained, sure, but they also understood. The boys overseas had it worse. If rationing helped win the war faster, then it was worth it. One of the most visible signs of the war effort in Los Angeles was the explosion of Victory Gardens. These were small vegetable gardens planted by ordinary citizens to help ease food shortages and free up commercial crops for military use. The government encouraged it with posters and slogans: "Grow your own, be sure, and plant a victory garden. Our food is fighting." And Angelenos responded in force. Thousands of victory gardens sprouted across the city. People with yards planted tomatoes, beans, squash, lettuce, carrots. Those without yards got creative. They grew vegetables on apartment balconies in pots. They turned vacant lots into community gardens. Schoolyards became gardens tended by students. Parks set aside plots for families to rent and cultivate. The Los Angeles Fire Department created a large vegetable garden right on the grounds of one of their stations. Firefighters plowed the earth. Using a homemade plow, they pulled themselves like horses. They grew enough produce to feed themselves and donate the surplus to local families in need. High school students leased 10 acres of land and grew beans as a fundraising project. They sold the harvest and used the money to buy war bonds. One elderly man in Redondo Beach, blinded in World War I, grew a full vegetable garden entirely by touch. He used his sensitive fingers to plant seeds, pull weeds, check the soil moisture, and harvest ripe vegetables. He canned the surplus and gave jars to neighbors. By 1943, Americans had planted 20 million victory gardens nationwide. Those gardens produced 40% of all the vegetables consumed in the United States that year. In Los Angeles, people grew food on rooftops, in backyards, along sidewalks, anywhere soil would take root. It wasn't just about the vegetables. It was about control. In a world spinning out of control, digging in the dirt and growing your own food gave people a sense of purpose and contribution. Poets wrote verses about their tomato plants. Newspapers ran contests for the biggest zucchini. Neighbors traded surplus, your extra cucumbers for my extra peppers. Victory gardens became a form of community, a quiet rebellion against shortages, a way to feel useful. Meanwhile, the population of Los Angeles exploded. Between 1940 and 1943, the population of Los Angeles County grew by more than 500,000 people. Workers poured in from all over the country, drawn by high-paying factory jobs. But where would they all live? Civilian housing construction was banned. All building materials were diverted to military use. The existing housing stock couldn't handle the influx. Old homes were subdivided. Families doubled up, sometimes tripled up, sharing small apartments. Hot bedding became common. Workers on different shifts would share the same bed. One person slept during the day, another at night. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and stressful. The federal government stepped in with emergency housing projects. They built simple, quickly erected barracks and trailer parks near the big defense plants. Lakewood, a suburb surrounding the Douglas aircraft plant, grew almost overnight as a company town. Thousands of workers lived in hastily built wooden homes with minimal amenities. It was basic, but it was shelter. Even so, it wasn't enough. People slept in cars. They pitched tents in empty lots. Some built makeshift shacks from scrap lumber and sheet metal. The housing crisis was acute, and it would get worse before it got better. The war ended in 1945, but the housing shortage didn't. Millions of veterans came home. They needed places to live. They got married. They started families. The demand for housing was overwhelming. The GI Bill provided low-interest home loans, which helped, but there simply weren't enough houses. That crisis sparked the massive suburban building boom of the late 1940s and 1950s. Developers like the Levitts on the East Coast built huge tracts of identical small homes as fast as possible. In California, similar developments sprouted across former farmland and orange groves. Los Angeles began its transformation from a relatively compact city into the sprawling metropolis we know today, and it all started with the wartime housing crunch. Life in wartime Los Angeles wasn't just about work and sacrifice. People still sought entertainment, distraction, and moments of joy, and Hollywood provided plenty of it. Movie theaters were packed every night. People lined up to see the latest films, musicals, romances, comedies, war dramas. The movies offered a couple of hours of escape from the anxiety and exhaustion of daily life. Studios churned out films at a furious pace, and many had patriotic themes. Stories of brave soldiers, heroic nurses, loyal families on the home front. Some were propaganda, sure, but they also reflected what people wanted to believe about themselves and the country. Radio was even more important. Nearly every household had a radio, and families gathered around it each evening to listen to news broadcasts, comedy shows, dramas, music programs. President Roosevelt's fireside chats were major events. People stopped what they were doing to listen. War news updates came several times a day. Families with sons overseas tuned in anxiously, hoping for good news, dreading bad. Big bands played in ballrooms and dance halls across the city. Swing music was the soundtrack of the era. Couples danced the jitterbug and the Lindy Hop, losing themselves in the rhythm for a few hours. Servicemen on leave would show up in uniform, and there was never a shortage of young women eager to dance with a soldier or sailor. These dances were energetic, joyful, and a little desperate. Everyone knew the young men might not come back. Churches became centers of community life. They organized bond drives, collected scrap metal, rolled bandages for the Red Cross, and held prayer services for the troops. People found comfort in gathering with the neighbors who shared the same fears and hopes. Letter writing became a near sacred ritual. Families wrote to sons and husbands overseas. Wives, mothers, sisters, and girlfriends poured their hearts into letters that traveled thousands of miles by ship and plane. They wrote about the garden, the weather, the neighbor's new baby, the dog that chased the mailman, anything to keep the connection alive and remind their loved ones of home. Many servicemen later said that letters from home were more valuable than food. They kept those letters in their pockets, read them over and over until the paper wore thin, and people on the home front received letters back when they could. Mail from overseas was irregular. Sometimes you'd get 3 letters in 1 week, then nothing for a month. Every time the postman came, you held your breath. A letter meant he was alive. At least he was alive when he wrote it. No letter. Well, no letter might mean nothing, or it might mean everything. The worst moment for any family was the arrival of a telegram. Western Union messengers delivering telegrams were dreaded figures. When one walked up your street, every mother looked out the window and prayed he wouldn't stop at her door. The telegram was terse, formal. We regret to inform you. Families who received one were marked by grief. Neighbors brought food. Churches held memorial services. Gold stars appeared in windows, a symbol that this house had lost someone. By the war's end, thousands of gold stars hung in windows across Los Angeles. Despite all the hardship, there was also a sense of unity and purpose. People believed they were part of something bigger than themselves. They were supporting the boys overseas. They were defending freedom. They were standing against tyranny. That belief carried them through the long, hard years. When the war finally ended in August 1945, Los Angeles exploded in celebration. People poured into the streets. Strangers hugged and kissed. Car horns honked. Church bells rang. Sirens wailed. But this time, they were sirens of joy, not alarm. The blackout curtains came down. Lights blazed in every window. After years of darkness, the city was bright again. By 1945, Los Angeles was not the city it had been in 1941. The war had transformed it in profound and lasting ways. The aircraft factories continued operating, but now they shifted from military to civilian production. Bombers became passenger planes. Fighters became private aircraft. The workers who'd built weapons of war now built the tools of a peacetime economy. But not all the workers stayed. Many of the women who'd riveted fuselages and welded wings were laid off. The message was clear: thanks for your service, now go home. Many didn't want to leave. They'd tasted independence, earned their own money, felt the pride of skilled work. But they were pushed out anyway, replaced by returning veterans who needed jobs. The defense industry remained a huge part of the Los Angeles economy, though. The Cold War was already beginning, and the military contracts kept flowing. The aircraft plants retooled for jets. New aerospace companies sprouted. Los Angeles became the heart of the American aviation and aerospace industry, a legacy that lasts to this day. The housing crisis lingered for years. Returning veterans married and started families, creating even more demand. The massive suburban building boom of the 1950s finally began to ease the shortage, but it also changed the landscape forever. Farmland and orange groves disappeared under tract housing developments. Freeways were built to connect the sprawling suburbs. Los Angeles spread outward in every direction, becoming a sprawling metropolis of cars, suburbs, and endless growth. The Victory Gardens faded. People didn't need to grow their own vegetables anymore. The rationing ended, and grocery stores filled up again with meat, butter, sugar, coffee. The war was over. Life could return to normal, or at least to a new version of normal. The Hollywood Canteen closed its doors for the last time on Thanksgiving Day, 1945. It had served its purpose. The soldiers were coming home. There was no more need for a place to dance and forget for a few hours. The stars went back to making movies. The volunteers went back to their regular lives. But the memory lingered. A golden moment when Hollywood and the military, glamour and sacrifice, had come together in a common cause. So what do we take away from the story of wartime Los Angeles? It's a story of transformation, a city that lived in fear, worked around the clock, sacrificed comfort, and emerged forever changed. It's a story of ordinary people who stepped up, women who built planes, families who grew gardens, volunteers who served sandwiches, neighbors who shared ration stamps. It's also a story of resilience. Los Angeles didn't crack under the pressure. It adapted. It innovated. It found ways to keep going, even when the future was uncertain and the enemy felt close. Today, when you drive past LAX and see planes taking off, remember, the aviation industry that dominates this city was forged in the fires of World War II. When you complain about traffic on the 405, remember, those sprawling suburbs were born from a wartime housing crisis. When you see an old movie starring Bette Davis or Betty Grable, remember, they washed dishes for soldiers who might not come home. Los Angeles carries the war in its bones. It shaped the city's economy, its landscape, its identity. And the people who lived through those years, the riveters, the gardeners, the volunteers, the families waiting for letters, they helped build not just planes, but a city and a future. The war ended 80 years ago, but its echoes remain.